through consciousness development, you start to become aware of different layers in reality. You can access wisdom.
Confront the unknown courageously. Speak truth. Have enough integrity so that you can break the rules when it's necessary in the service of a higher good. To know that is to be human.
You need to be extremely passionate about what you do. And if you're passionate about what you do, then this will infect others.
A lot of people are slaves of their fears and their patterns, but it's very important that you are free and authentic.
If you have the ability to empty your mind and perceive, then you can see.
Actually, it's inside out. Start with yourself, and then you will be more capable of looking at the outside world.
We have to really slow down and ask ourselves what we're doing here and what responsibility we carry for future generations.
I am Joël aan het Goor, and this is the Awake Origins podcast. Here to break down the misconceptions about success and happiness, bringing you inspiration from awake leaders, entrepreneurs and creators to empower you to create your life from the inside out.
James Nestor, great to have you on the podcast. I've been looking forward to our conversation. I love what you created with your book, Breath. I have it here. And while reading your book, I realized how important breathwork has been for me in the last few years. A couple of years ago, I interviewed Wim Hof. I think you might know him, Wim Hof, at his home in the Netherlands. And that for me, around that period, I started experimenting with breathwork for myself. And what followed was one of the most profound experiences in my life throughout that breathwork. And it has become also a crucial part of what we do with Origins in all our work and programs with leaders and entrepreneurs. But what I love about your book is that it inspired me to bring it to the next level and change my way of the way I breathe throughout the normal day, to integrate it into my normal life. And well, your book has been, of course, endorsed by people like Joe Rogan, Elizabeth Gilbert, Wim Hof, and has been inspiring many people. I believe it's even now translated into 30 languages. And my first question to you would be, how does it feel to have written a book that can change the lives of people in such a direct and concrete way?
Well, I would love to accept that and say that I was the only one responsible for doing that. But as a journalist and as a reporter, I'm just a filter for information. So I am lucky enough to have a job where I can go and interview some of the most interesting people in the world who are doing fascinating research and try to put that puzzle together into a story. So, I do not do direct research into breathing. That's not something that I even want to do, because I want to remain objective throughout this process so that I can see the world clearly and then construe that to the reader. Having said all that, the response to this book has been completely unexpected. It's been pretty overwhelming, but to me, the highest compliment is that it's helped someone out with their life, to take something that is free, that we carry around with us all the time, and to be able to focus that in order to enrich various aspects of your health. So I think that that's wonderful if people can get that out of this book.
What inspired, what ignited your interest in breathing?
It wasn't one thing in particular. It was several things that happened over several years. So I never thought I was going to be writing a book about breathing. What a boring subject. And even when I had the book idea where I thought that there was something interesting in this, my agent, my editor said, no, this is a terrible idea. So I just forgot about it, and years passed, and I kept finding things that just didn't seem to add up. I was able to get to know freedivers who are able to control their breath so much so that they can hold their breath for 7-8 minutes at a time and dive to depths below what scientists think is possible. And then you see someone like Wim Hof, who is able to tap into his immune function and is able to teach other people how to do exactly what he's doing. Wim always says he's not special. This is a simple technique that everyone can do. And So when you start looking at breathing and you start looking at the physics of breathing and how breathing affects our physiology, you realize it is so influential on every single aspect of our health, and yet most of us completely ignore it. So after several years of collecting all of these random stories, I presented this to my agent and editor. I said, I really think there's a book in here. And they said, okay, let's explore this a bit. And then I went into the field and spent years and years writing and researching and trying to figure this story out.
Yeah, so what really made me wonder was, while the impact of breathing is so big, and we'll come back later to this, why is there relatively a little scientific interest or interest in this to increase the way we breathe? And like you said, I think in your book, the missing pillar in health is breath. Why is this?
Well, that's a question I kept asking myself. I said, if all of this is real, and we can see from scientific studies, we can see from measurements you take in your own body in real time, how your breathing affects your brain, how it affects your heart, how it affects your circulation. So there's no debate about that. It's all very well known, but I think so many of us think that our breathing is so simple, it's an unconscious act, that it can't really have such an influence over us. It's so obvious, right? It's right in front of us the whole time that I think we're convinced that things need to be complicated in medicine now to really be effective. I mean, look at what's happened to food. Oh, you need this C vitamin, you need this B12 vitamin, you need this K2 vitamin, you need this amount of protein. Like our ancestors never did this, and they were perfectly healthy. So I think in the modern day, we're so convinced that in order for things to work properly, they have to be very elaborate, but nature is simple first and foremost. And that's my best reasoning for why this stuff has been so long ignored. And I don't have any other really good reason. Maybe there's a better reason, but I think it's that exactly, that it's just too obvious.
So when you say this stuff has been ignored for so long, what is this stuff? What are some of your most important findings?
And I think that I was inaccurate in that phrasing there. So in certain areas, breathing has been studied in the scientific community for 50 years, longer than that if you look at the research going on in Russia in the 1950s, and even some of the research going on with carbon dioxide in the 1920s and 1910s, and before that in the late 1800s. But this research was done by scientists who had a hard time communicating with other communities in the medical communities. So even though the research is there, even though this is so easy to measure, it never seemed to get out to the general public. It seemed to stay in academia. What's interesting, though, is that our ancient ancestors, going back 5,000 years and on up, from ancient China to ancient Hindus, even the ancient Greeks, so they all knew that breathing was a medicine. This is how they considered breathing, as this vital medicine, as important as the food we're eating. And so it's just interesting that we have this foundation, this understanding and appreciation of breath for thousands and thousands of years. We even have scientific studies proving how breath can so influence us on so many levels. But it just didn't seem to really get out to most people, just that in the same way that nutrition information hasn't really gotten out to us until around 20 years ago. I mean, you should have seen the food I ate growing up. I had no idea that stuff was such garbage. So it takes a while for this stuff to really get to the general public.
In your book, you write that the perfect breath is 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out. Why is this, and what happens when you breathe like that?
I think as a general rule, that's a very good starting place. Some people who are taller, who have larger lungs, should breathe a little slower than that. right? But for most people, this is a good place to start, because throughout the day, most of us tend to breathe too much. We tend to breathe into our upper chests. And when we're breathing this way, this is very inefficient for bringing oxygen into our bodies to feeding our hungry cells. The reason is when you breathe these short breaths and too many breaths, you're just taking air into the very upper lobes of the lungs, and then you're exhaling it. So all the air that's taken into your mouth, your throat, none of that participates in gas exchange. So we only use about 50% of the air that we take in when we're breathing this fast and this shallowly. So by simply taking slower breaths, lighter, easier inhales, deeper exhales, we can increase our efficiency by about 35%. So we get more oxygen for less effort, which is why your heart rate tends to go down, which is why your blood pressure goes down, and the different systems of your body enter this state of what researchers call coherence. So this is how the body wants to function. Why do you want to put all this undue wear and tear on your body constantly throughout the day? You should let it function naturally in a state of calm, and that's how you're going to be able to perform better and even live longer.
So what happens with your body and your mind when you're in coherence?
So what happens is there is this big muscle. It's shaped like a parachute. It's called a diaphragm, and it sits underneath your lungs. You can think of the lungs like two fleshy balloons. They can't inflate and deflate on their own, right? They need something to do that. So we have this piston in our bodies, this diaphragm, that when we breathe in, that diaphragm descends, and when we exhale, that diaphragm lifts up to push that air out. So not only is this diaphragm functioning to allow ourselves to get air in and out of our bodies, it also serves other functions. That the diaphragm is connected through a nerve that's connected directly to the brain. And most of these nerves between the brain and the diaphragm, through this phrenic nerve, are coming from the body to the brain. So when you breathe slowly like this, in this fluid, rhythmic, light pattern, you send messages to the brain to calm down. So you can actually take control of your nervous system by just breathing. A lot of us think that the brain is controlling everything in the body. The brain needs inputs and signals. And the body, in which case for our breathing, more of those signals are coming from the body, from our breath to the brain, than the other way around. So this is the quickest way to diffuse stress in a real measurable way. It's not just a placebo effect or subjective. We can measure what happens.
So I'm wondering, to what extent in your daily life have you been able to integrate this slow breathing? Are you, for example, doing it right now when you're listening to me, or how does that work?
Well, people think that since I wrote a book about breathing that I'm now the best breather in the world, and I'm, wear a lot of robes and look at crystals and breathe all the time. That's not my role as a journalist, right? I just went into the field and researched the top scientists who were studying breath and respiratory function and the top studies and other breathing therapists. Sure, I picked up a few tricks along the way. And once you see people so profoundly transformed by their breathing, you can't help but want to adopt some of these patterns. So I'm conscious of my breathing throughout the day, without a doubt. But the point of developing healthy breathing habits isn't so you become a neurotic like I was writing this book. It's so you develop these skills that you don't have to think about it, right? You're just working on default. Your body naturally wants to do this. That can take several weeks to several months to do. So I think that most of the time I'm a good breather now. I wear enough wearables to show me my respiratory rate, to show me my heart rate variability, which gives me a view into my breathing. But I also do some conscious breathing exercises in the morning. I'm a big fan of this, especially with such a stressful job as I've had for the past year, is to start off the morning with about 10 to 15 minutes of focused breathing exercises. And then I do Wim Hof method a couple times a month. I do Sudarshan Kriya a few times a week, and I try to stay up on that stuff as well.
So how has it impacted your life or your experience of life, if you would give it words?
Well, I try to keep that out of my reporting because I don't want people to think that my experience means that this is proof of anything, or that just because this worked for me in a certain way, it's going to work for everyone. I don't think that that's an accurate description. What I've done in this book and what I try to construe to people is look at the science. When you have dozens and dozens of clinical trials showing that breathing can so effectively work to reduce symptoms of asthma, even reverse it, it can so effectively work for panic, then that's what's convincing to me, is data and real studies. Having said that, yeah, it's completely transformed my life. I used to suffer from chronic bouts of mild pneumonia because I'm a surfer here in San Francisco, and bronchitis and wheezing. Even though I was eating all the right foods, I was exercising all the time, sleeping all the time, I was still having respiratory issues. And I've had none of those things. I haven't had a stuffy nose since I was sick about 2 years ago. My nose got stuffed up for a couple of days. So, and it used to be chronically stuffed up. So again, I want to be very clear that my experience will be different from someone else's, but look at the science and look at how these simple techniques can really help get rid of even allergies and mental health issues just by adopting them and breathing normally. I mean, we get most of our energy from our breath, not from food, from breath. So if you think that how you're taking in that breath and exhaling it isn't going to affect you throughout the day, it's not going to affect your athletic performance, you're crazy. It has a huge impact on all those things.
So, and I know you don't want to position yourself as the doctor or expert, but if you would advise someone on where to start, just a very small thing, how can you start?
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. I'm not a breathing therapist. I'm not a doctor. There's doctors in my family, lucky for me, because I bounced so much of this information off them before I even wrote about it. But the very first thing I would suggest people doing is to breathe out of your nose as often as you can. So I'm going to show you why this is important. I brought a guest here today. So if you look at the nose here, and for people who are listening to this, I'm holding up a cross section of a human skull, and we're looking at the nasal cavities in the mouth. When you're breathing air through the nose, you're forcing it through all of these different structures, right? Where it passes through different hairs, it passes through a mucous membrane. And while air is passing through this, it's pressurized, it's heated up, it's moistened, and it's conditioned so that by the time it gets to the lungs, it's purified in many ways. So it's treated. So your lungs can absorb about 20% more oxygen breathing through the nose than equivalent breaths through the mouth. And if you look at the mouth here, there's none of these structures. That's how long it takes for me to get a breath through the mouth. And a lot of people think that's good. It's more oxygen more quickly. That's not how the body works. When you have this slight pressure, right, in the lungs, you allow the lungs to more easily and efficiently absorb oxygen, which is why these slower breaths, these longer breaths, give you more oxygen than breathing like this. So it really starts with the nose. And I think if you can become a habitual nasal breather, you're about 70 to 75% there to become a healthy breather, because the nose naturally slows down the air. It monitors how much air is coming in and out of your body. And it also helps defeat pathogens. It helps to fight off viruses and bacteria. It's our first line of defense.
What I found very interesting is that you described that even when you're doing sports or endurance sports, that you can keep breathing through your nose. Well, we're used to breathing through our mouth as soon as we do a short run. So this is possible.
It's possible. It's not fun at the beginning. So especially if you're someone who's been out, and it was awful for me when I first began. So when we have a habit, that habit can be very hard to shake, right? And if you've been breathing through your mouth while you're jogging for 30 years, then it's going to be hard to just default to nasal breathing for a number of reasons. One, it's a psychological habit. And for two, is these structures of the nose here need conditioning, just like any other structures of the body. So you can't go from just mouth breathing to entirely nasal breathing. It's not going to work. Our noses are coated with different tissues and different cartilage and different structures that they need conditioning to open up. And so usually after a couple weeks, people are like, oh my God, I never thought I'd be able to breathe through my nose so easily. But it takes a few weeks or even a few months. For elite athletes, it can take up to 6 months to convert. But once you convert, performance goes up. Recovery times can be cut in half. You feel way better and you operate at peak efficiency. And we've seen this with various studies and literally hundreds and hundreds of case reports of trainers who have trained their elite athletes to become nasal breathers. That's not to say you can't at sometimes at peak states in zone 4 and zone 5 take a few breaths through your mouth, right? Right before you're about to reach a finish line. Maybe that's advantageous, but only when you're using it as a tool, only when you're conscious of it. So I was stunned by the advances you can make in athletic performance by just focusing on your breathing. And it's no coincidence that the top trainers in the world right now, Laird Hamilton, Brian McKenzie, Patrick McEwen, the very first thing they do is train their athletes to breathe properly. And the vast majority are breathing in a dysfunctional way.
So do you see a shift now happening in sports to,
Yeah, it's been happening for a long time. It's just a lot of trainers have been keeping the stuff secret. This is their special sauce, right? This is what they want to become the real expert in. But now the cat's out of the bag, and you would be amazed by how many professional weightlifters, how many wrestlers, how many ultimate fighters, how many runners. Like breathing is the thing right now, and it should have been the thing long ago. But if you look at the history of athletics, since the 1950s, people have been using this, but they've been very quiet about it. And the teams that did use it, they destroyed everybody. They won more medals for their discipline, be it track or be it swimming or be it whatever, than anyone else. But they kept it their little secret. And that is definitely starting to change now.
What I'm curious to, because I think the way you breathe impacts your awareness, your consciousness, your state of being. So when I slow my breathing down right now, I can feel a tiny, subtle shift also in my calm, like you're describing. What is happening with methods, for example, like the Wim Hof, or something that I really like is, we call it conscious connected breathing. You do this for an hour and then you come into different states of consciousness. You can go through dark emotions that apparently were somewhere in your system. With these kind of methods, what is happening within you?
So when I was talking about breathing slowly, breathing calmly, breathing light through your nose, this is how you should be breathing most of the time. But once you've gotten that down, you can start exploring with other breath work. And so in the last about third of the book, that is what I get into. It's where else can breathing take us? How can we use it to trigger different things in our brains and different things in our bodies and blood flow and hormones and all of that? So there's a reason why the Wim Hof method is so similar to Sudarshan Kriya, which is so similar to many pranayamas, which is so similar to even holotropic breath work. It's because all of these systems purposely stress you out through your breath, Just as breath can calm the body down, as you were just doing, these slow breaths, you increase blood flow to the brain. Your heart rate slows down. You feel this calm because you're tapping into your nervous system and reminding your body that you're in a safe, calm place. You can also use breathing to jack your body up and stress yourself out. And a lot of people think, why do I want to stress myself out? I'm stressed throughout the day. The point of these breathing techniques is to focus that stress into a very short amount of time and compound it so that the rest of the day you can be calm. It's like going to the gym and working out, right? You're not going to stay in a gym for 24 hours a day. That would destroy your body. For the same reason you wouldn't do Wim Hof method for 24 hours out of the day. That would destroy you as well. But for a very short amount of time, compounding this stress is like this pressure release valve for your body. So you stress yourself out to calm yourself out. And that's what it allows you to do. It allows you to consciously control stress. You learn how to turn on stress specifically so that you can turn it off, which is why Wim Hof method and Sudarshan Kriya and so many other breathing techniques have been found to be so effective for people with autoimmune diseases and people who have these constant inflammatory markers in their bodies. It helps to balance them out. And those studies from those people, I think, are among the most fascinating. It shows you just how powerful breathing can be.
This was years ago, but I've been experimenting with psychedelics and what it does with your experience. And I found later that my most profound experience were not with psychedelics, but with the breathing. So it brought me into an even more pure and clear state in which in that spaciousness or in that now moment, I could feel just a connection with myself. What does science know about what is happening within your being, within your mind, when you bring yourself into that state with such methods of breathing?
We don't know as much as we should. And this is one thing that I found a little frustrating in this world. Wim has volunteered to do any study anywhere, which is what is so valuable about what he is putting out into the world. We're able to really tap into some of the functions of this heavy breathing, what's really happening to the body. So what we do know is that you can produce these self-created opioids. You can create a dopamine release. You can create serotonin release. So you can create all of these different neurotransmitters, different hormones to make you feel incredibly good, incredibly calm, very enriched and light. But what's happening to the brain, I think, is among the most interesting of all the things that this heavy breathing can do for you. And again, I wish there was more science here. They're starting to do a study, booting up a study at Johns Hopkins University, which is one of the top medical institutions here in the US, of looking at exactly what's happening to the brain. But what we do know is when you breathe very heavy for a very long amount of time, and you can try this if you're listening to this podcast. Don't do it while you're driving, but you can breathe like that, and you'll feel some dizziness in your head, and maybe your fingers will start tingling. That's not from an increase of oxygen, okay? It's from a decrease of circulation. And if you continue breathing this heavily, you will continue to decrease your circulation to your brain and to your extremities in your body. And through chronic overbreathing, you can decrease the blood flow to your brain by about 40%. And so the current hypothesis is that this is such a reduction of blood flow to the brain that different circuits in the brain, different areas start malfunctioning. They start thinking that the body is dying. And so this is one of the reasons that they start releasing these different hormones, these feel-good hormones. And it's also one of the reasons why people tend to have these rebirthing experiences, these extremely enriching psychological breakthroughs. So this is all hypothetical. We don't know for sure. We do know about the blood flow, and we do know when certain brain regions are cut off from having energy and oxygen, they will start going on the fritz. We know that. And we also know that these sort of heavy breathing therapies have been proven to be so effective with people with addictions, with people with even schizophrenia and other mental disorders, in which they're hardwired into this negative feedback loop. And what the psychologists and psychiatrists think may be happening is this is a way to reboot the brain, right? Start it off from scratch so that you can create different neural pathways that are more healthy. It's the exact same thing that's been studied with mushrooms and addiction, that it helps kind of clean the brain out so that you can start again. I really hope that more science is going to be done in this area. I was surprised by the dearth of science, but I think that we have the ability to measure this stuff now much more easily than we did 50 years ago. And I really hope some researchers will take this up.
Yeah. And of course, this way of breathing is something I think you need to experience. But when you say rebirthing or psychological breakthroughs, what does that mean? How would you describe, what have you heard from other people, what happens in a breakthrough like that, subjectively?
This was a term that came from Stanislav Grof, and he was one of the first people to experience LSD when he was a psychiatrist in Czechoslovakia. And it was such a profound experience to him. This is when it was fully legal, and where Sandoz was just distributing LSD to psychiatrists and saying, this might be of use to you. We created this for menstrual pain, but it's having all these other effects in people.
This was in the 60s, or when was this?
This was in the late 50s, and he was using LSD in top institutions and found it worked incredibly well for people with serious mental health issues. But LSD was made illegal in 1968, and Grof wanted to find a way of eliciting these same responses in his patients, but not to get thrown in prison. So he developed something called holotropic breathwork, which is where you breathe extremely heavily for hours at a time in a room with other people. And what he found is holotropic breathwork had so many of the same effects as LSD, and it had a lot of the same therapeutic benefits for the people who were doing it. So he is the one who came up with this terminology of the dark night of the soul. He said that this will put you through this journey into your body, into your mind, and you'll come out of the other side, but it won't always be pretty. And so rebirthing is another technique that was developed in the late 60s, early 70s, under the same premise, where in order to start fresh, you have to go out and clean out the junk in your mind, to clean out all these different pathways and different feedback loops that you've created. And breathing can be an extremely effective way of doing that, because it's not only psychosomatic, it is causing a physiological change to occur in your body that is very profound, that a lot of people have never felt in their lives. And so they're able to go into that and come out the other side and feel changed or restored in some ways.
Yeah, I remember the first time feeling my body like that is unbelievable. It's very profound to just know that this is alive in such a way. Yeah, I never did the holotropic breathing for several hours. I believe you did. What happens with your experience of time? Because hours sound...
The original holotropic breathwork, now they're doing it for a shorter amount of times for the attention deficit disorder society that we live in. Now I think people are able to get away with an hour. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I want to do the whole thing. So it's about 3 hours. It's 3 hours where you're sitting on a mat, very loud music, and you are breathing as hard as you can for 3 hours. And some people do it for 2. I think 2 is still worthy. I think 1, It's part of the process to be so uncomfortable. So at the beginning, I did this because I wanted to understand it. If I'm going to write about it, I want to be able to write about it from the inside. At the beginning, the first 15 minutes, and 15 minutes is a long amount of time, I'm thinking, there is no way I'm going to be able to do this for hours. I feel miserable. I was sweating, but I was cold at the same time. I thought, this is idiotic. And then you reach this state, just like anything else. It's almost like exercise. The beginning of a run or a bike ride, at least for me, is always miserable. You're like, oh, I have to do this for 2 hours. And then you get into this flow state. And this holotropic breath work is just like that. Once you get into a flow and once it starts to take over, you enter into some very, very deep states of altered consciousness. And again, I don't view it as subjective. I know that there is so much happening in the body and brain to elicit these responses. I will say that in the class, I think some people, and I don't want to judge anyone, but some people weren't really breathing that heavily and were having these out-of-body experiences and turning into wolves and stuff. So for them, I think it's that setting can elicit certain feelings. I'm not sure that it's so much a physiological response for everyone, but you can try it for yourself. Sit on your bed and breathe really heavy for 3 hours, and you will feel changed in some way at the end of that process.
Is there a difference in doing it together with other people in the room or doing it by yourself?
I think so. Just like there's a difference in doing yoga and with a group or seeing music with a group of people. There's just something about being in a community of people who are experiencing something at the same time as you are. And I don't know what that is scientifically. Is it a vibe? Is it a mood? Is it a kinship? Is it a support system? It's probably all those things. But I think it is important. I think it's very important to have a therapist there, because some people can start having very strong reactions to this, physical reactions, mental reactions, and you need someone there to talk you down. If you tend to be someone who might be going into that sort of state. So I would highly suggest doing it with a group of people. I wouldn't do it alone on your bed, even though I just said you can try to do it alone on your bed. Try to do it for 15 minutes, okay? That's fine. If you have a heart condition or if you're pregnant, don't overbreathe for 15 minutes, but anyone else, you can try it. And, the Wim Hof method, in which you're doing 30 huge, deep breaths, you can reach some very deep states doing that. I often do. There isn't a time I do that don't really have a strong physical reaction to it. And it's wonderful. I'm a big fan of that breath work, Sudarshan Kriya as well.
Yeah. Now, I can relate to what you're saying. Like I said, within our programs, we do it as well. Then it's just an hour. So it's maybe it's nothing compared to the 3. But with the music and when it's being guided, it can be very profound. But if you don't have someone who facilitates it, I think you're also lacking the trust to get into the unknown.
Yes.
Yeah. I
don't want to dismiss the hour-long version. This is probably, and I probably just sound like a jerk now, that's probably very helpful for people who have never done it before as an introduction. But I think you can acknowledge that the further you go into something, the more rewards might be at the end of it. It's just, it is not the most pleasant thing you've done, but at the end, you can really feel something.
Yeah. With all that you know about breathing, what would you wish for society to integrate in the next couple of years? What if you would envision your biggest dream when it comes to breathing and the place it gets, maybe within schools or within companies or for just people individually? What would you envision?
The great thing about breathing is it's free. Our breath is something we carry with us all day long. and it can have really profound transformative effects to your mental state and your physical state. All of this we know. It's all scientifically validated. So this sounds so boring because it's so simple, but the very first thing I would suggest people do is to just become aware of your breath. It starts with that, because once you become aware of your breath, you can notice when your breathing starts falling off. You can notice when you're over-breathing, when you're under-breathing, when you're holding your breath. And then you can fix your breathing. So once you start with that foundation of awareness and acknowledging that this is an extremely powerful thing you've got at your disposal anytime during the day or night, whether you're watching TV, whether you're working out, whether you're in front of your computer, answering emails, you can help focus your breath. And when you do that, you can have a very strong influence on how your body and brain are functioning. So I wish it was something more glamorous and sexy than that. But again, nature is simple, yet subtle. And I think our breathing is simple, yet subtle. But that doesn't mean it can't be profound at the same time.
Thank you. Do you think it should be taught at schools, just the way you breathe?
Absolutely.
Is that happening somewhere right now?
Well, if you think of what happened to nutrition, so we knew in the 1800s that processed industrial food was garbage. We knew it. There are studies. Scientists acknowledge this. They said it's actually ruining our faces. This processed food is making our mouths too small. It's making our teeth crowded. It's ruining our breathing. It's ruining our bodies. We're not growing tall enough anymore. And all of this is documented. But it took 100 years for that message to get through. So now I'm hoping kids are being taught about nutrition. You need to eat a lot of vegetables, not just packaged Cheetos and Pepsi, right? And so our breath, it's such an easy thing to teach, and kids love this stuff because it's instantaneous. If you change your diet, maybe you're going to see results in a couple of weeks or a month. But if you change your breathing, you're going to feel results in a couple of seconds. And so, especially with kids, how much stress is on kids nowadays, this is such a wonderful tool. And you don't really need to beg them to do it, just like you need to beg them to eat their broccoli or spinach. They'll want to do it. With all the work, I've been working with a group that works with the UN, and we're trying to get more of this messaging out to kids in developing nations, because breathing is free and it can really help you in so many ways. So I think that absolutely it should be taught in schools at the beginning of a class to have kids breathe in a certain way. They'll giggle, they'll make fun of it, but they'll also feel it and they'll also calm down. So also for office workers, there isn't anyone who can't benefit from this stuff. And we know that from the scientific record, and you can feel it so quickly. If you feel this change happening in your body after a couple seconds, right? Like, wow, I feel calm. I feel some warmth in my body because my circulation's increasing. Guess what's going to happen after a couple of days or a couple of weeks or a couple of months? Right? Your body is really going to respond to this in so many ways. So there are no negative side effects to breathing well. There are only benefits. So I can't see why people wouldn't want to do this.
I don't know if you do this, but can you guide me and the listeners through a very simple breathing exercise just for a few seconds?
Sure. There's so many, and there are so many variations on the same theme, but I'm just going to do two. I know you asked for one, but this first one's so quick and easy. This is by Dr. Andrew Huberman down at Stanford University, has been researching this for a while. He calls it a physiological sigh. And so if you notice a lion before it goes down to sleep, or a dog, they go, then they put their head down. So we have a separate subsect of neurons in our brain responsible for sighing. And we can turn those on by making ourselves sigh. And when we do that, we reset our breathing and we instantly calm our bodies. So all this is one breath on top of the other with a very calm exhale. So it goes like this. It's okay to breathe through your mouth on that exhale. That's just fine for this exercise. So it's 2 breaths in and then exhale. Very slowly exhale. Do it again. 2 breaths in and then exhale. So this is the quickest way that you can reset stress in your body and you can relax yourself. I don't know if you're feeling what I'm feeling after doing that, but it is so calming. And the fact that this is being researched at one of the top research institutions in our country is thrilling to me. So if you want to further relax your body, this may be a little challenging for people who haven't done a lot of breath work, but you can just do it to whatever length is comfortable for you. We're going to inhale to 4. We're going to hold for 7, and we're going to exhale for 8. If that hold is too long, cut it down to 6 and exhale for 5, right? It doesn't matter. But if you can stick with this, I think you'll feel something. So I'll lead you through this. Again, inhale to 4, hold for 7, with a long exhale to 8. Again, you can exhale through your mouth for this if you want, and go shh. Exhaling through your nose is just fine as well. So here we go. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, exhale, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Do it again. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, exhale, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if you do that through a few patterns, you're going to notice that you're either holding your breath or exhaling for about 70 to 80% of the time. When we exhale and hold our breath in this way, we trigger a parasympathetic or calming rest and relaxation response. So when we inhale, we're triggering a slight sympathetic response, which is why your heart rate goes up when you inhale. But holding your breath and exhaling, the heart rate's going to go down. So that 4-7-8 breath work, you can see a zillion YouTube videos of it. It's all over the place. But it's a great thing to do to calm yourself down or to do right before you're going to sleep. You do a few rounds of that, maybe 5 to 10 rounds, and you'll feel your body getting calm. So these are 2 that I use all the time. If I'm getting stressed out, I'll just do that physiological sigh, and then maybe I'll do some 4-7-8 breaths after that. And I notice it has an extremely calming effect on your body and mind. That's measurable, and that's what's so convincing to me about it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing this. I never tried those, so I will experiment with it definitely in the next couple of days. With the success of your book, what is up next for you as a writer and journalist?
Well, I have another book idea, but it's just too soon to go back into my little shed that I built in my backyard for the next 4 years and just work on that. So I've been very busy with the breath stuff, which has been fantastic. It's an interesting experience for a writer to go from interviewing people and basically living in this very closed world where you're just in front of your computer and just thinking in your interior world to being the person that's being interviewed. It's a weird juxtaposition. At the same time, it's refreshing because it gets a little lonely being in that writerly world. But I do miss parts of it. I miss the solace. I miss the quietness of it. I miss the meditation of just thinking about something day in and day out and processing it. So beyond a new book idea, which I've had zero time to write down, I am working on a concept for a mini-series where we'll be taking a lot of things that we talked about, not just breathing, but other views into health, and putting this into a mini-series, looking at the anthropology, looking at evolution, looking at different elements, and looking at how our bodies have changed over the past few centuries for the worse and how we can get them back. So that's currently what I'm spending the most time on. And after that, I'm hoping to relax a bit because it's been a pretty crazy year for a lot of reasons, you know, the pandemic, but also a lot of work. So I'm hoping to do some traveling once things really open up, clear my brain a bit, and reboot for the next project.
Yeah. Great. Where can people find you on a website, social media, if they want to dive into, of course, your book, I think, can be bought anywhere. How can we find you?
I have a website where my publisher allowed me to reprint the entire bibliography of the book. So there's about 400 scientific references with videos. I did some interviews with experts in the field, professors at Harvard and other leading institutions. All of that's for free because I realize a lot of what I'm saying sounds pretty crazy to a lot of people. Your breathing can't help cure your posture problems. It can't help cure autoimmune diseases, but look at the science first before you make up your mind. So that's available at mrjamesnestor.com. That's an mrjamesnestor.com. And there's other resources there, various videos and instructional videos, all free for everybody. I'm also on Instagram. I'm trying to get better at the social media thing, which for an older person is so mystifying. But I'm only posting things that are about the science of breathing and related subjects on my Instagram channel. I'm also having different interviews with experts in the field, so you can hear from this research, not from me, not from a reporter, but from the actual people who have been doing it for decades.
Thank you. And thank you for your time today and sharing your book and all your knowledge with the world. I think it's really special.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. If you like this video, please press like, share, or comment below. For more content about living and creating from your essence, subscribe to this channel and, of course, the Awake Origins mailing list.